A little bit about you. We're here with Ryan Stuer from Magnify Learning. I don't know if you guys know anything about Magnify Learning. He's a big PBL guy, which is project-based learning. Ryan, can you share a little bit about your background, what Magnify Learning is, and what your vision for PBL is?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. First things first, though, Dan, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor, and I really appreciate it. My journey into education, it might be a bit abnormal. I started out as an engineering student at Purdue. I went and did engineering for a Fortune 50 company, and then found out, and I liked it. I loved it. It was difficult. It was technology based, but then we started doing these days at United Way to give back, and it was like, I think my favorite 2 days this year were when we were working with United Way, an after school program. Maybe I want to shift careers. And so I started teaching eighth grade English in the southwest side of Indianapolis, an urban school, and taught traditionally because that's what I knew. And I was pretty good as a traditional student. But it didn't work for my learners, right? Like I switched to education because I wanted to help kids. And what I saw is I saw kids liked me, but they also were failing out of high school. So I was teaching eighth grade and they weren't really making it through high school, a lot of them. So when project-based learning came along, I was in a failing school, and my thought honestly was, why not? Why wouldn't we try something different? And absolutely, I loved it. We started a school within a school. Our kids loved it. We had 25% of the kids in a large urban middle school, like 1,000 kids, seventh and eighth grade. We had 25% of the kids demographically balanced. And in a failing school, we would have been a B on the state testing scores if you pull them out. We had 8% of the discipline, and our attendance was 1.5% higher. The only thing we changed was the instructional model, right? Everything was in the same. It was in the same classroom even, really, right? So, but we gave them project-based learning. We gave them a why, and it changed things. Changed my life, changed a lot of kids' lives. So I've devoted my life to project-based learning since then. Been doing this for well over a decade now. And so we started Magnify Learning in that process. Started out with teachers teaching teachers. We were super grassroots organization. And then we started to formalize things. And now, we've trained an awful lot of schools and an awful lot of teachers at this point in districts. And so we look at project-based learning from the grassroots portion of what teachers need to know. And then we try to meet with the administrators at the top and the district at the top so they can support those initiatives so that, so we're doing the best thing we can for kids, which is everybody's goal. So it's been an awesome ride, and we see a lot of great things. It's super promising. The future looks great in the world of project-based learning. We're excited.
So again, project-based learning, not a lot of people know what that means. And a lot of people that I run across think project-based learning and they equate that to the STEM classes, to your special area classes. In my school, we call them special areas. So it's your arts, in your STEM classes. We call them technology education, but it's a STEM class. That's what New York State calls it. But what exactly in your mind is project-based learning?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the opportunity, because I think the whole world should know. So we call it authentic PBL. So we think we need to be solving real-world problems, but we think it's K-12. We think it's in every subject area. I'll give you an example. I was talking about eighth grade, so we'll stay there. In eighth grade biology, kids have to learn about the Punnett square. So you can drill them, go right through the textbook, page 1 to page 306, or you could have a doctor come in and say, hey, kids, every day parents find out that their child has a genetic disease. And they immediately want to know two things. They want to know, number one, is my kid going to be okay? Number two, they want to know everything there is to know about that genetic disease. Hey, eighth graders, would you help me put pamphlets in my doctor's offices, PSAs, PowerPoint presentations about these different genetic diseases so these parents can know what's going on and stop freaking out? And eighth graders put their heads up and they go, yeah, I'd actually do that. Right. And then you say, okay, well, to do that, here's what you need to know. You have to know the Punnett square. What's the Punnett square? Well, do you want to help these parents? Yes, I do. Well, then you have to learn the Punnett square. Do you want me to do a workshop on that? Well, yeah, I guess I do. And now the learners have just asked to be taught a standards-based idea so that they can solve a problem in the world. And that's what we think project-based learning is. We think that K-12 learners can solve problems, real problems in the world. Now, are they going to solve global poverty? I don't think so. but they can take a small chunk out of the local poverty or local food insecurity, right? They can be a part of the change, and that's empowering, and that's a big deal.
So I guess what I've taken from that too is one, it's real world, obviously, and that's that's one of the big components of project-based learning, right? And one of the other things is it's relevant. It's got to be relevant to the audience, whatever audience, whether it's your 8th grade biology class or a 3rd grader down in the elementary school working on hot dogs at the baseball park or something like that. I don't know. So I'm just whatever. I'm just spitballing some ideas here. So what else is involved with that? So we got real world scenarios that are meaningful and relevant to our kids, which is huge. But there's other parts to it as well. So what are some other parts that are built into the model?
Yeah, great question. So, because it's an instructional model, right? So it's not willy-nilly. There isn't kind of a mess in the middle. You may have heard that term. I can't stand it. Like we start with an entry event where, in this case, this is where the doctor's going to come in and launch this PBL unit. Let's say it takes 4 weeks. There's going to be some workshops around, standardized tests, and, our power standards are going to be addressed in there. They're going to be taught. They're going to be assessed with traditional quizzes, possibly. There could be some performance assessments. A lot of the stuff that teachers are already doing, we're just going to reformat those. So we're going to have an entry event at the beginning. We're going to have a need-to-know session. We say, hey, learners, what do you need to know in order to create a PSA for a doctor's office? Well, I need to know about hereditary formats. I need to know about Punnett square. I need to know about these different genetic diseases. I need to know if we're working in groups. I need to know how I get my points. And you start to build this inquiry throughout the unit. So every time we're teaching something, a learner has asked to be taught that. Can you please teach me how to use Google Slides in a way that I have a great presentation that people will want to watch? Great, let's do a workshop on that. And then as they're building out their final product, again, we're assessing standards throughout, and then they're going to have a public presentation. So we're going to bring that doctor back in. We're going to bring some nurses in. We're going to bring parents in. And then your learners are going to present to this authentic audience. They're not going to present to just their teacher and their peers, because we all know that kids can turn in garbage to their teacher and their peers, because sometimes that's even funny, right? But we're there as educators to be there 184 days to love on these kids, to have a relationship, to teach them content. When a presentation at the front of the room has strangers in there, it elevates the level of the work. It's like, hey, this is a real doctor that's like really going to put our pamphlets in a real office. Like, people are really going to like use this stuff. I should make sure it's not awful, right? It's like, so that's some of the dynamics, but it's a great question, Dan. It's because it's not, sometimes I give 2 definitions of PBL. Like, I have this passionate definition I gave you right off the bat, like it changes lives. The technical definition, like there's an instructional model. Like, I wrote a book called PBL Simplified, the 6 steps to take PBL from idea to reality. Like, we've got 6 steps that you can walk through, so teachers know where they're at and the learners know where they're at. So it's not as far off as sometimes we think from what we're doing, but there is definitely a change in format that creates a student-centered classroom.
I agree, and I've along those lines, I've been kind of doing PBL. I've been teaching for 30 some odd years since, oh my gosh, 93. Oh, holy cow, it's been a long time. Anyways, I've been doing PBL. The more I get into this and I find information from you, listen to your podcast, and stuff like that, I've been doing this stuff, and I think a lot of teachers are on the cusp of this. A lot of teachers do projects. And there's, I think, and maybe you can help me out here, there's little tweaks that they could do to, like you said, they're already doing a lot of this stuff, and there's a little tweak or maybe a big tweak to a project they're doing that could make an authentic PBL project. Can you help me out a little bit there in that regard? Because like your biology teacher is probably doing a lab. Can that lab then become a PBL project fairly simply?
I think so, right? So, you take that lab and then you just ask, there's a couple of questions we ask, like, who does this in the real world? Who cares? Which sometimes people get offended by that, but it's like, who cares about this? the reason that I hope we don't get offended is that there's an answer to
Right.
that. And in fact, our teachers in the classroom are the best person to answer it because they know the content and they've been in the real world. So like, where does this standard fit in the real world? And how can we communicate that? And then just kind of a why, like, why are we learning this? And the why, you want to get as close to your learners as possible. If the why is so that you can do well in college, that's way too far away. And it might be true. Right? Like the why might be true, but a sophomore can't see that. A third grader definitely can't see that. Adults can't see that far out, right? Like we really can't see past 3 years. So if the why becomes, we have to learn perimeter because we're going to build these raised garden beds for the local senior center. Well, that why is now 4 weeks ahead of me. Like I can see that. Like I can see the people I'm going to help. So maybe you already have a perimeter unit. Maybe you already have a persuasive writing unit. Now you're going to apply it to something that's really close to you. So again, like the local senior center needs garden beds. Boom. Like we're going to use that. And you're still going to use the same perimeter unit that you've always used. Right? Assuming that's best practice, right? Like assuming that you're workshopping, right? And you've got kids engaged, right? So you're not throwing everything out, but you are going to repurpose it and really hammer the why of, because we answer the age-old question, don't we? Like kids are, why do I have to learn this? And it's a totally legitimate question. And like, right? Like we get offended by it sometimes, but it's like, it's a totally legitimate question. If you go to a PD as a teacher, you're going to professional development as a teacher, don't you want to know why you're there? Right? It's like, if somebody just said, well, just go because you should, right? Just go because it'll be good. It's like, I don't want to. So what we're doing a lot of times is we're just answering that question of the why for the work. Like, why are we learning these standards?
Right. And that's a big question. And a lot of times I hear from other teachers in administration, hey, the administration's like, what's your why? What's your why? What's your why? Why are we teaching? And this gives that authenticity to it. And you talked about, and I believe you call them community partners, right? I believe that's what the terminology is for you guys, you over at Magnify Learning. And I think it's pretty standard. But you got to find somebody in the community. How hard is that to find that partner for somebody that maybe is interested in this, but doesn't really want to ask, like myself. I don't necessarily maybe want to go, hey, Ryan, we're doing this perimeter unit. And I see you're the CEO over at Memory Gardens. You want to come in and talk to my class for 2 days? So how does that, how can you give me some strategies on overcoming maybe that like imposter syndrome, or I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but the anxiety of reaching out?
Yeah. The anxiety is real, right? Like it's not something that we do on a normal day. It's not something we've typically been trained to do. What we do is sometimes we'll just give the challenge, like even in a 3-day workshop, if somebody's a little hesitant to reach out to a community partner, we say, hey, we've got an hour break or we've got a 30-minute break. I want you to call that person right now. And they're like, really? What would I say? I don't know. Let's role play. So we role play real quick. And then they call. And every single time we do that, it's like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Like it works out. And then once you get a community partner in your classroom, you're absolutely hooked because the kids are engaged. The why is super obvious. All of your learning now has context that you're trying to present. And the community partner is just totally legitimizes everything that you're doing. Like, why do I have to know slope intercept form? Why do I have to learn about DNA? And then you bring in a DNA expert from the state police department to come talk about it. It's like, whoa, this is awesome. Right. And now all the kids are engaged, and it's like flipping a switch. And I know if you're listening for the first time and about some of these ideas, you're like, that can't be. But it's real close. So then once you kind of get the bug, we've got some teachers, they won't do a PBL unit. They won't teach a unit without having a community partner because they're so just entrenched in this idea of the engagement that a community partner brings. And so there are a lot of different tactics. I don't know if you want to get into like how you find community partners, that kind of thing. But there's a bit of an imposter syndrome. The anxiety is real. But once you make the first call, and I suggest a warm call, like somebody you already know is going to say yes. Right. Let it be an aunt or an uncle or a friend that's going to come in. And because you're always worried. Right? This is another worry, Dan. It's like, I know what my kids said last week in my class. Like, I don't want a community partner to like hear that, right? It's like, but
100%.
Right? 2 things happen that make it okay. Number one, your kids tend to sit up just a little bit straighter. right? And they try to do a good job. Now, are they going to be perfect? Absolutely not. That's when the second
Kids.
thing comes in, is community partners want to help, and they understand that it's not perfect. They understand our jobs in schools are hard. So when somebody does goof up, a kid goofs up, like they get it. Like there's grace there for us. So you can absolutely reach out. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, and along those lines, I taught an architecture class last year, and a friend of mine is the chief architect. He's also a Purdue alumni. He
All right.
went there for school, as both his kids did, and I had his kids in class, and I coached him in swimming. I brought him in to talk to my high school class about architecture. And I
Yeah.
had kids that in the class that were, they were there because they needed the half credit. And there
Yep.
was some there because they were going to a school next year to become an architect. And I'll tell you, for 80 minutes, he talked, and he talked, and those kids were riveted. And these are kids like you were talking about there. Some of these kids were kids that might have been kind of the goofball. They might have,
Mhm.
if he's not there, they're on their phone, texting or whatever.
Yeah.
Typical high school age kid stuff that we see. And I'll tell you, he got as much out of it as the kids did,
Yep.
which was amazing. So I talked to him afterwards along these lines, and so I guess to help initiate that call, the community partner sometimes gets more out of it than the kids do. Would you agree with that type of statement?
Absolutely. Because sometimes the question comes up like, do I have to pay my community partners? And it's not even that you don't pay them. Like we pay them in the experience of getting to give back. Like everybody wants to help schools. They're just not sure how to do it. So when they can come in and talk about something that they love or they're an expert in, like that is them giving back, and that is the reward that they receive. And every community partner that I've ever had come in has just said thank you for the experience. It's just over and over again.
And listening to your podcast, I remember at some point in the fall, you had talked about some ways to bring in community partners, and more than just, hey, we're coming into the class and you're going to present to this community partner. You talked about breakfasts and some informal things. Can you explain some of those um, kind of non-classroom events that help out with the partners and getting the comfort level in there?
Sure, yeah. So the first step might be, Dan, somebody's asking, well, we don't have community partners because we're in a rural setting, or they're all taken because we're in an urban setting. And neither one, those are both myths. So the way you overcome that is you just do a quick protocol on community partners. And whatever group you have, if it's your grade level or if it's a whole staff, everybody just starts to brainstorm, who do you know that's in business? And you list them all. Who do you know that's in the nonprofit sector? And you list them all. Who do you know that doesn't fit either one of those? And suddenly you have a list of 50 people, typically 50 plus. And because you've got some teachers that are just connectors in the community, right? And they know everyone.
Right.
It's every school we've ever been to. There's always that connector, right? And now a nice, easy invite is to a community partner breakfast. You do it once a quarter, typically on a Friday morning at like 8 or 9. And folks that are in business, or maybe they're an engineer, they say, hey, boss, I'm going to come in a little bit late. I'm going to go have a community partner breakfast at the school. Totally accepted by most businesses, right? And even small business owners. And you feed them and you show off some of the great work that you're doing. You bring in the kids, say, hey, here's the PBL unit they've been doing. And people are floored. People are floored from the outside. Like we are hustling. We've got PLCs going. We're looking at power standards. We've got common assessments. We're doing all this stuff. And nobody outside of our walls has any idea until we tell them. So when you bring them in, they're absolutely floored that this is the thinking that's going on in schools, that this is the work that we're doing, that our kids are producing, and you're worried that your kids are going to say something wrong. And it's not even close to that. Like the kids step up, the community partners are amazed. And what happens is the community partners start to tell different stories about your school. And that's when you really start winning, because somebody's going to tell your story. And if you wait for it to be the angry parent to put something on Facebook or in the paper, that's the story that's told. Right. But if you have a community partner breakfast, you've got 30 people that have all come in, love what they're hearing, and those are the stories they're telling. And before they leave, you say, hey, we've got a few PBL units coming up. If you'd like to be a community partner, give us your name and email. And by the way, who else should be in this meeting when we have it next quarter? And now you've got 50 people instead of 30. You've got 30 people that you can call on to come into, a presentation or to launch a presentation. And it's so win-win for the community, for the schools, for the kids.
Right.
It's awesome.
Right. And especially like I'm in a small community where I am too. And I've had the kids, I'm having kids of kids of kids now that I've been there. And it's really weird. And it's awesome in the fact that, like you said, the public doesn't know what we do on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I'm finding out too, and through some similar organizations here in Jamestown, the kids that we're turning out, that we're graduating, are going to be these community partners employees. So there's another vested interest that these community partners and business leaders had. And because like we talked about, I've been there for a little bit. Some of the people that are in these positions, in these engineering positions or CEO positions or, president, whatever, higher level, those were my students.
Yeah.
Right. So think about, there's another avenue to think about as we're getting there is reach out to former students because they remember you. They're not going to remember that test.
Yeah, that's right.
They're going to remember the PBL unit. They're not going to remember the test. They're not going to remember the quiz. They're not going to remember the worksheet. They're going to remember that day that Ryan Stuer came in and talked about engineering, or the engineer from the Cummins engine plant here came in and talked about it, or my friend John that came in and talked about architecture. That's what they're going to remember because it, like we talked about at the beginning, it means something to the kids.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm assuming too, and you're preaching to the choir here with this one. I love the community partner aspect. I love the authenticity of it. I love the real world aspect. Because one of the things that really gets me is when you see those social media posts like, I've been marked safe from doing my Pythagorean theorem. Well, that's great, but you're an English person. You're a writer. So yeah, why would you do the Pythagorean theorem? Now the kid that's in my class that we built the shed for his neighbor uses it every day because he's building decks every day. He's building kitchens. He's doing construction. So he's using the Pythagorean theorem without realizing he's using it. Mm-hmm. And that same kid that might have struggled in your 8th grade English class is now, because of some real world situation that kid went through and had maybe a community partner come in, he's standing at the end of your driveway and he's able to do that area formula and volume and figure out how many cubic yards of concrete are going to be required to pour your driveway and give you a quote on his head. But if you ask that kid in 10th grade to do that in a math word problem, he's going to say no and pick up his phone and start playing Tetris. So there's, those are some of the things that a lot of teachers are already doing, I think, and maybe you've seen more of that than I have. So what, along those lines, so you got those teachers that buy in like myself. I'm assuming you got the reluctant teachers, because one of the worst phrases I think you can say in education is, well, this is the way we've always done it. And I think that's pretty much any organization, right?
Yep, that's right.
If you're not growing, if you're not, getting better, you're getting worse. There's no staying the same anymore. Things are moving too fast. So what do you see as one of your big challenges of implementing PBL? You go into a school, they've decided to bring you in as a PBL consultant to give them a great, and I love the 3-day training. And you got that teacher, that 30-year teacher like myself, maybe that's an English teacher. And I don't want to pick on English teachers, but they're sitting in the back, they got their hands crossed, and they got their stack of essays that they're grading while you're trying to do this. How do you get across? What do you do for them? I know. So I'm just going to stop talking now.
No, you're good. You're good. First of all, we should just buy them lunch, because they do have to grade those essays and they take a really long time. I've been there.
They do.
Right. I've graded the 5-paragraph essays till midnight plus. And then what we do is we live the PBL process, right? So it in the same way it engages kids, it actually engages adults too. We'll just start asking the questions like, why does it seem like this won't work for you? And we start to, well, I have to teach a novel and it takes 6 weeks to read the novel. Okay. Could we read an abridged version, or could we read in small chunks? Or if we're really good, we would just ask the question, like, is there a way that you could do that in 4 weeks and be able to create a PBL unit, right? Or an end product. And then they start thinking and say, well, yeah, I think I could, right? And we just try to get really curious, right? Because at the end of the day, we all love education. We all want to serve kids. We start from a place of like, where are you at and where would you like to get to? And we think that we can help people. So those folks that are reluctant, we acknowledge that they chose the same path as we did. They wanted to be a teacher, and there's a reason for it, right? If you just needed to make a salary, you go be an accountant, you'd make a lot more, and you wouldn't have to grade papers, right? So there's a reason that you're going to go through this process, right? It's because we all love kids, right? We want them to have opportunities and light bulb moments, and so we just start from that place. We say, well, what if you had an entry event? What if you didn't change anything, but you just brought in a community partner to launch your traditional unit? I guess that could work. How much time would that take? It might take 20 minutes of one of your class periods. Like, could you spare 20 minutes to try a community partner? Yeah, right? And then we try it. And did it work? Did it not work? Right? And what we know is that it works almost every time, right? And then same thing with the public presentations. Like, if you're going to give a presentation anyway, what if you brought in a community partner? Like, who could you bring in? Like, who would care about this? Who would give good feedback? Well, I do know the person over at DNR. They could come in and speak, or they could listen. And okay, why don't we try that? And what we see is the engagement level just goes up. And I just don't know of a single teacher that wants less engagement in their classroom, right? There's always those kids we're trying to reach. And I don't know, Dan, it works. Honestly, like because then by the end of day 1 of a 3-day workshop, everybody has a PBL unit started, planned out, based on standards, right? Because we start with standards. Like, we live in a world of standards-based tests for the foreseeable future, so that's where we plant all of our learning. And then everything that we make in those 3 days is directly for your classroom. And like, we're literally making rubrics for your classroom. We're making the quizzes, whatever it is. So everything is completely applicable to the work you're doing. And we think it should be the same thing in the classroom. So we really just try to live PBL throughout the whole process. And we've just seen it turn people around, right? We've got 15-year teachers that are like, well, how come I haven't been teaching like this my whole life, right? And like, teachers, well, like yourself, you're super engaged, right? So it's like we get teachers like this. And sometimes it is a surprise. Somebody's in the back and they've got their arms folded. By the end of 3 days, they're like, I've only got 2 years of teaching left, but I'm going to do this. Like, I don't know what it looks like exactly. I'm going to try some of these things. And because at the end of the day, I think if we take we do believe that project-based learning is best for all kids in all grade levels and in college. Like, we've taken it there too, right? We think it's a great vehicle to bring SEL into the classroom, right? We think it does a lot of really great things. We've seen it fit everywhere. But we also don't come in with the haughty attitude of saying, you have to do this now or you're not a good teacher, right? Like, that's not it at all. So I like to say, like, we purposely named ourselves Magnify Learning, not Replace Learning. We come in, and on day 1, we acknowledge that good work has been happening before we got there. And we've just always been a grassroots organization, teachers teaching teachers. And the boots on the ground piece, I don't know, it's always related to people. So they always give us a chance, and then once they give us a chance, they kind of catch on. So,
and I'm assuming, like, when you go into a school and do one of your 3-day workshops, it's not a sit and get thing. It's not. I mean, because so many of the PDs we get as teachers, and you've been there. 100%. It's a 1 day. The guy talks for 6 hours, or the person, whoever it is, and it's usually either like a Friday PD session or a Monday PD session, and the next day you go in, and I've been guilty of this as the next guy. You go into your classroom, you shut the door, and you do the same thing you did the other day.
Sure. Well, you didn't see you never saw how it applied to your work, and you never got to, like, in the moment, change your work in any way to try anything, right? Like, we try to recognize that right off the bat. Like we train all of our trainers are PBL certified, so they go through a very rigorous process.
Mm-hmm.
We have this conversation of like, hey, these teachers probably still don't, even though we do a ton of communication up front, they probably still don't really know what they're getting into for 3 full days.
Right.
So the first 15 minutes are key. Like, are the next 3 days going to be awful for me, right? Or are they going to be really great? So we're super active. We use protocols. People are up and moving. You're doing the work that's going to directly apply to your classroom. You're not going to put it into a folder and hope you get to it. There's literally time to start doing the work so you can ask questions while we're in the room. And we just find that, again, we would advocate for that same process in the classroom, right? That the things that we're doing, we're transparent with the learning. We say, hey, here's where we're going to take you. And then here we go. And we ask questions. And if you've got questions, I always say, don't leave a hard question in your pocket. Like if you think it's going to offend me, you know what? Just ask it early. Ask it early and smile when you ask it. It's fine. We've heard it all, so that posture, I think, is a big deal. And I think, I hear that in your voice, Dan, and in the work that you do. And you can tell the difference when somebody's just up there kind of speaking to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes, I don't know if it's the confidence that because we've done it so much in the classroom and we know that this process works, but it takes a bit of a leap of faith to say, hey, this workshop's going to be great because you all are going to create great things. It's not going to be the great words that I say, which is part of one of our philosophies, is that it's not about great teaching, it's about great learning. What can we get our learners to do? And if you do that with adults, they jump in. Again, we're passionate. We want to do the great thing, the best thing for kids. So.
And now, as you're talking here, I'm thinking about some things in the back of my head, and there's a lot of stuff that's kind of covertly hidden inside of PBL. You mentioned SEL stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned presentations. You mentioned authentic audiences. What's kind of hidden inside of this that goes well beyond the classroom walls and well beyond graduation as a senior in college and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's the best podcast question I've ever been asked, because
wow,
it's 100% true, right? So people bring us in, sometimes people bring us in to do PBL training and they don't really know what PBL means, right? And that's okay.
Right.
But because what we end up doing is we end up holding workshops on assessment, right? Because assessment practices are often not where they need to be.
No.
We end up holding workshops on benchmarking. And these things are not inherently PBL specific, right?
Right.
We talk about grading a lot. Like, what does a C mean in your class, right? Does it mean that I did all the work, but I forgot to turn in my homework? Does it mean that I'm really nice, but I don't really know the content, so you gave me a C, right? Like we kind of bring in some of these challenges. We bring in, how do you present? We bring in transparency of the work. Suddenly your grading becomes transparent because we break it up in these buckets of content and collaboration and presentation and agency. And we think SEL is going to be a real big deal. We're gonna pivot really hard towards SEL. So we think that PBL is a vehicle for SEL. And so what I mean by that is, if you're going to teach a kid how to be, how to be a good friend, right, or how to collaborate well, you can do that in a 20-minute period and say these are the things you should do. Or you could be in the middle of a PBL unit where you're literally in groups collaborating, and now you can do a workshop of how you interact and collaborate with peers, right? And how do we create a safe environment here? And now they're like literally in the work while they're in these SEL opportunities while we're teaching these SEL opportunities. And we think it's going to be a big deal. So we are excited about that. But yeah, so when we're doing PBL, like you look at our workshops, and they're always workshops that teachers ask for, right? Like, how am I going to assess my standards? Well, what we find is a lot of schools haven't done the power standard work, right? So it's like, well, what are your power standards? We don't know. Well, let's back up just a minute and figure that out. So PBL is this direction. Again, there's a very clear instructional model, but we end up really kind of teaching and workshopping around a lot of different aspects for teachers and just creating best practices in schools. And culture is such a big deal. So. Yeah,
culture's huge, and that's the tone that the teacher sets.
Mhm.
I believe that's a lot of top-down management in the school.
Mhm.
If you've got a great administrator, if you've got a great administration, which I've been blessed enough to have some quality, awesome principals in my school that support the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I've had some superintendents that have been awesome, and I hear horror stories, as I'm sure you have, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you've been in schools that are horror stories where they're micromanaged and whatnot. Um, but kind of getting back to this hidden stuff in this above and beyond SEL. Now, one of the big catchphrases as we started in the early 2000s was 21st century skills, the 4 C's.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? And now that we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century, which is hard to believe already. I mean, it's flying by.
Yeah.
Obviously you're teaching communication because we're talking to they're presenting to an authentic audience. They're working collaboratively. So you have teachable moments built into a PBL section where you can say, hey, kids are getting a little bit something. So you can have a little conference and a little discussion, get some SEL in there, get some stuff like that. So how does PBL address this creativity, this communication, and the big one, critical thinking? I think is a huge one. How does PBL kind of covertly really address those?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think it is covert, and sometimes we call them employability skills.
Yes,
Right, and because
100%.
ultimately, I think we want our learners when they leave our systems to go get good jobs and live happy lives, right? Raise their families and and repeat. And if you look at World Economic Forums or Inc. magazine, any industry partner that says these are the things we think are important, and then you label them PBL. Look at the top 10, at least 5 of them. You'll find problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, agency, collaboration. They might call it teamwork, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, whatever buzzword it is today.
Yeah, right. Like 21st century skills, we all needed C's for some reason. It just helped us remember it, I guess. But
I guess so.
But when you're working in real world situations, then that's where you have the covert critical thinking. To directly answer your question is, you can tell in a math classroom that sometimes when you do a problem and you get a remainder, you're like, oh, there shouldn't be a remainder. That's not right. So you go back and rework it, and you get the right answer because you knew it was supposed to work out evenly. Well, nothing in the real world works out evenly, right? So now when you're looking at this driveway and you're going to figure out how much cement you need in it, you're like, well, it's 20 by 30. Well, it's actually 20 and 4 inches and 3/4, right? And it's 30 and 7 inches and 1/8, right? And it doesn't work out evenly. And your kids are immediately just kind of in this place where they have to think critically. And often they struggle at the beginning. And you have to tell them, like, yes, that's right, you're struggling because there's going to be a remainder. It's going to be ugly. It's going to go out 6 decimal places. And we have to figure this out. So what do we do? And right, and you have to work through that. So there's a lot of critical thinking that goes through that. Even just the idea of like, how many cinder blocks do we need? Right? And in a story problem, we know that it's going to work out in the end, and there's going to be a set number of cinder blocks. But then when you go out to build these garden beds at the local senior center, it's like, well, it's 6 by 8, but that tree's in the way. So I think we're going to have to go 6 by 7. So what do we do now?
Right.
I don't, and I don't know if those seem like trite examples, but those critical thinking opportunities happen again and again and again because you have real world scenarios. And if you don't have a real world problem to solve, and I just said the word scenario, which is something we don't say often in Magnify Learning. If you have a scenario, then the adults have gone through the work to make sure that it works out evenly and there's no remainder. Right. But if you have a community partner that just comes in and says, hey, I need these pamphlets for parents that have kids with genetic diseases, there's no right answer for that. Right? There just isn't a right answer. We've got to figure out what's the best that we can do to serve, our community partner. And there's just a ton of thinking that goes into that it helps kids see the world in a different way. It's really neat work.
It is. And along those lines too, when you're talking about, no right answer and stuff like that. Where was I going with this? But do you find that a lot of the students that are good at playing the game of school, like one of my thoughts is like the valedictorian, and granted, those kids are a heck of a lot smarter than I am, and they're gonna be awesome. But sometimes do you wonder if those kids that are in the top 10 are just better at playing the game of school than the
Oh,
kid that's going to be in the woodshop class? You know what I
yeah.
mean? Because is this okay? How many I'm assuming you go into schools and you walk in and you see some example PBL stuff in part of your workshop training, and you see the kids coming up going, "Is this right? Is this okay?"
Hmm.
In a practical, so you're in the classroom with this project, and you got these kids that aren't good with the open-ended answers. I
Hmm.
see that a lot in my classroom, and I see a lot of struggle with not having with having 752 different right answers to the
Hmm.
same problem and them all being correct and them all, I equate it to like a house. If we're building a house, we all live in some type of structure. They don't
Hmm.
look alike, but they
Yeah.
all have the same basic components. They all have a kitchen, they all have a bathroom, they all have bedrooms, they all have, whatever. Right? So how do you see that dealing with that kid that needs to have the right answer?
Yeah. It's part of the productive struggle. If you bring this
Yes.
in, right? If you bring it in, you'll have a revolt from your honors kids, honestly, at some point. Like they will come to you, say, "Hey, we don't like this. We want it to go away. I want to put the highlighted word into the blank and get my
Right.
points." Right? And you have to
Right. Playing
explain
the
to
game.
them. Yeah, they do. They know how to play the game. And they still have critical thinking skills, right? We don't want to sell them short,
Sure.
but they're selling themselves short and they don't know it because
Right.
in some ways we're telling them they're winning, right? Like I went through high school, I had a 4.2. I, did three
Right.
sports. So everybody told me I was winning. And then I went to go be an engineer because I did great in math and science. And it's like, I don't want to do this my whole life. Like, this is not my passion. But nobody ever asked me
Right.
what I wanted to do. It wasn't, I thought I had won, like how many of our kids can finish high school thinking they won, but they don't even really know what they want to do. And
Right.
I think we have to challenge them, and they will get it. We've found that the honors kids will get it. They'll sit down. The community partners aspect is a big deal. I'll give you an example. We had a kid who he was part of the self-proclaimed nerd herd, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
right? They liked that term. It was not
Sure.
derogatory. But him and his group came in and said, "Hey, we don't want to do this anymore. We just want to get the usual stuff and do the work." Well, they came around, and now he works for John Deere. And the CEO is coming through all these different plants and came through his plant. Well, Jonathan knew that when somebody important like that comes through, you don't just shake hands and let them move on. You engage that person somehow because that's what we did. We engaged community
Right.
partners. So before the CEO even came in, Jonathan thought about what he would say, what question he would ask to engage him, and he got to have a 10-minute conversation with the CEO that nobody at his level should ever have, right? It was supposed to just be a handshake and move on, but he understood the power of a community partner. And it's because he had that opportunity. So he had the smarts for sure. He got all the grades and did the things, but because he
Certainly.
got that twist of like, yes, we validate you and we want you to be able to apply this in the real world, he could have that opportunity. And those things are game changers.
So I guess what I'm kind of taking from that too is above and beyond PBL accelerating achievement, right? You're learning stuff. You're still learning the content, and we're not throwing away the
Oh,
multiple choice test. We're not throwing away the unit quiz. We're not throwing away the essay. We're not throwing away traditional
yep,
summative assessments
that's
or
right.
formative assessments, as the case may be.
Yep.
Those aren't going in the trash and hey, we're going to totally revamp everything. There's still a need for that inside of a PBL unit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and we've got there's actually some great research that came out in 2021 by the Lucas Foundation where they put PBL into AP courses specifically and saw the kids were, I think it was 8 to 10% higher were getting their 3 or above, right? Because they actually knew the context and could do better. Like AP courses is one of those where they say, well, we don't have
Yeah.
time, we just have to cram all the things, right? And it's like,
Right.
well, but we all know that ultimately doesn't serve us, right? And
Right.
so how do we get PBL in there? But we still, I mean, our job is to teach our standards, right? At the end of the day,
Right.
and right. So we think you can do that, and you can do it within context to where kids are learning the employability skills. And there's some pretty solid research again in the elementary level Title I districts where, those kids, our kids don't need skill and drill. They need context for the learning to understand the things that we're doing skill and drill around. And when they get the handles of a PBL unit, now they can achieve and they can, find mastery in that math and literacy pace.
So you talked about employability skills, and I alluded to earlier, your community partners are students, typically future employees. Because in my area, a lot of our kids, some leave, some don't, but it's an area where, like I teach at the school I went to. I'm lucky enough to teach it where I graduated. Awesome. So my joke is they let me out for 5 years for good behavior. I couldn't imagine a better place to be.
Yeah.
Right. I love my district. I love the school. The people there are great. But you're talking about employability skills, and this kid, Jonathan, because of PBL, he was able to adapt to change in the workplace a lot easier and handle different assignments and be able to take, and this I think is one of the key components, and you can help me out here, being able to take that concept, that idea we're teaching, that standard, but be able to apply it to multiple different scenarios, different not scenarios, but situations that arise in the workplace, because they're going to be in school for 18 years. They're going to be in the workplace for 40 or 50 years, doing whatever job it is. And like I tell my kids, we're going to learn how to, maybe we're coding, right? We're going to learn how to make some things appear on the screen. You may never become a computer scientist, but that's not why we're doing it, right? We're doing it for the perseverance, for those soft skills. So is that something that PBL does very well, is with those soft skills?
It does. Honestly, that's my passion. My passion is the soft skills, because I've been an engineer at a Fortune 50 company. Like, I know that's what actually gets you ahead, right? Like, I got 2 promotions because I went and talked to district leadership, and we talked about Ohio State football, and then we talked about hockey. It was like a 7-minute conversation, but because I could have like personality skills, I got both of those promotions, right? Now I could do the work, right? So I had the baseline skill set. I would maybe above, right? So I could do the work, but you have to be able to apply those things, or it's really pretty useless in industry place, right? So, I'll give you an example of, we had a kid that literally got the lowest score out of 1,000 kids in the middle school on NWA, right? The formative test that we took. Got PBL. He started asking questions. His scores went up. He gets out of high school, does not go to college. It's not the path he wanted to take. He starts flinging boxes at FedEx. And then an opportunity comes up where he could drive a forklift. Well, if you get to drive a forklift, you get a certification, you get a raise, and there's only so many people who can do that. So you have job security. And then a hazmat opportunity comes up. So he gets his hazmat certification. He gets a raise again and job security. So now, he's not going to go to Yale, didn't want to, but he's married. He's got job security, and he got a raise. Why? Because he could see an opportunity and he could seize it, right? He did the problem solving that it took to figure that out. And it's one of my favorite examples, honestly, Dan, because, it's not the, I love that Jonathan's at John Deere doing amazing things, right? I love that Jakob is working in the hazmat table every day at FedEx, and he probably plays too many video games still, but he's married and providing for his family. It's awesome.
And I love those stories too. And I kind of preach that one a little bit too, because we got these kids that kind of get slipped through the cracks, like the Yakums, that slip through the cracks that aren't going to go to a 2 or a 4-year degree. And my son is probably one of them. And looking back, he should have gone to our community college, got a 2-year degree, and gotten out in the workplace, because school wasn't his thing.
Sure.
But I think PBL in the whole philosophy behind it sets up kids for a better chance of success in whatever they do, whether it be college, whether it be becoming a doctor, or like Yakum going to work and filling boxes at FedEx or UPS or drive Amazon truck. There's nothing wrong with any of that at all. because we're going
Yeah.
to need tradesmen. We're going to need, I think of, I grew up doing a lot of this stuff too. Um, Electricians, plumbers, masons, guys that can build houses. Those guys problem solve every day.
Yep.
Every day. If you got a guy, and you're going to need them. At some point, your toilet's going to leak, or you're going to want an addition on your house, and you're going to need that guy that maybe you didn't talk to in high school, and all of a sudden, he's coming to your house and he's saying it's going to cost $200 for me to show up to service your furnace.
That's right.
Just to show up.
Yeah, that's right. That's just to show up. They're making good money.
Right, and their whole job is problem solving.
Yeah.
Now there's a skill set involved with it that they've had training, but they continue like Jakob, they get more training. But their whole job is problem solving.
If you can create lifelong learners, right?
Right.
I can go learn to be a plumber. I can go learn to be I don't even like, and then maybe I find out I don't like plumbing. I'm going to go learn to be a carpenter now, right? An apprentice is making 60 grand, right? So it's like, so if you can learn that though, you can go do really anything versus, if you get to be apathetic or you just get to get points and move on, and that's how you think you're going to win. There's no business in the world where you put 30 people in a room, we tell them stuff, they regurgitate it back, and we give them money. Like that, nobody does that, right? So the problem-solving piece is the lifelong learning might be the best aspect of project-based learning. If we had to distill it, I'm just saying that off the top of my head, but I think it's true because of the inquiry that comes, and then the learners are asked to then jump in and solve these problems on their own, scaffolded, of course, but they're asked to solve them. They learn how to solve these problems. So then when their mortgage doesn't add up and they're losing money, like they can figure it out. When their budget isn't, I don't have to teach a kid a budget. I have to teach them problem solve to be like, hey, this isn't good. I should do something different. And that's a big deal. It's not a standard, but it's a big deal.
But I think that's a very foundational philosophy of what you're trying to do, if I'm not mistaken, is build those lifelong learners. As a teacher, we want to have lifelong learners. We want to turn a kid out that's going to continue to grow, right? And you're always gonna have the kid that just does whatever, right? You're always gonna have that guy, and you're always gonna have the overachiever kids. You're always gonna have the outliers of the bell curve, because that's just the way life is. That's the whole point of the bell curve. That's why it's a bell curve, right? But I guess in the long term, looking at the future now, what do you see for PBL and what Magnify Learning is doing? I know you have a goal over at Magnify Learning. Maybe you want to share that with us?
Sure. Yeah, our goal is, we call it 51 by 51. We have 51% of schools using PBL by 2051. So over the next 37 years or so, depending on when you're listening to this, we think that, we think all schools could be using project-based learning. And the dream is what does it look like if the majority of our kids are graduating as lifelong learners who can problem solve, think critically, and communicate with the world? We just think it's an amazing world. Like we think the world's better off. We think communities are growing. We think families are happier. People are better off financially. Like we just see, like in the communities that we see now that are really embracing PBL, and I say communities, I mean schools and families and industry working together to really create an ecosystem or a community that's positive for everybody. As that grows, we just see that being better off for the world.
So along those lines, you talk about all this stuff, 51. How are you doing with that? I know you're in a lot of schools. I know you're into you're doing a lot of work with Magnify Learning. Yeah. How would somebody get a hold of you?
Sure. You can Google Magnify Learning. A bunch of stuff will come up. So you can get a hold of me that way. You can just Google Ryan Stuer. There's a bunch. I try to be super accessible for people, because we know that we're not going to get to 51 by 51 on our own, right? We know that we're going to need partners for that. We know that there's going to be big systems involved. So I would just encourage people listening, like set your own moonshot goal, whatever you want to call it, that big driving force goal. The BHAG would be Jim Collins's term, the big, hairy, audacious goal, because it just changes your mindset. We're always open to talk partnership. We don't partner with everybody. Not everybody's a great fit, and that's okay. But we're always looking. We're always examining what we're doing, right? So like we're moving towards, really working with districts to look at larger leadership systems. We're looking at schools to create sustainable systems. We think that after about 3 years, you shouldn't really need us anymore. Like we think you should have teachers that are trained in your building that can teach the same workshops we taught you. We're going to give you those resources, and then you can now teach your new hires, because we can't train everybody every year for 37 years. Like it's not going to work. Like, so we need a movement. We call our followers movement makers. We really want to create a PBL movement. We know we can't do it on our own. So, you start reaching out, and I think go magnifypbl.com. Magnifypbl.com will get you to the homepage. But we've got a lot of content out there that's for free. Again, if you're not going to make a movement by holding all your toys real close, right? So we try to get a whole bunch of info out there so people can run with it, whether it's a book study or a YouTube series. We just want to get it out there for people. And then when you're ready to go deep, of course, we're ready to partner. But our partnerships, again, we look like 3 to 5 years, and we want you to be on your own, right? And we've got plenty of districts and schools that have done that, and they're rolling, right? And now our partnership changes. We're just trying to magnify their work at that point.
Right.
They don't need us to come to a jump start, because they have their own PBL certified teachers. And like, we love that, right? So we just want to kind of be a spark out there to inspire and encourage and equip people.
That's awesome. I think you guys are doing some phenomenal work over there at Magnify Learning. A big fan of what you guys are doing. Now you have a podcast that you've recently modified in light of some changes. Could you let my listeners know about that and where they can find that podcast?
Great. Thanks for the opportunity, Dan. We're really excited about this. So we've had a podcast called PBL Simplified for about 6 years. And what we found is we're trying to serve teachers and administrators and, a little bit of everybody. And sometimes our messaging would get a little muddled. If I'm talking to principals on the podcast, but teachers are listening and say, well, wait a minute. So we split it up. We've got 4 podcasts now, actually. So we've got 2 binge series. We've got Binge PBL for Teachers. It's 20 episodes, all 15 minutes or less. So you can binge all the main need-to-knows that we get around PBL. And then we have the same thing for administrators, Binge PBL for administrators. Then we have 2 ongoing podcasts, PBL Simplified for Teachers and PBL Simplified for administrators. And we really split the audience because the needs are different. So PBL Simplified for Teachers, we've got teachers that come on and they'll do a PBL showcase. They'll talk about PBL that's in their classroom. And those are typically our guests. And then if it's a solo show, I'm going to be talking about the main need-to-knows that teachers are asking for. And then on PBL Simplified for administrators, it's kind of the opposite. So we're going to talk about those need-to-knows that administrators have. What does it look like to lead a building? What does it look like to launch your vision? What does it look like to have a learning or leadership team for a PBL? And then we're going to bring on administrators, and we bring on some other community partners, from business or sports or nonprofit, those types of areas. But so we tried to split the audience so we could really just, again, we asked the question almost continually, maybe to a fault, I'm not sure. How can we best serve our audience? And this year it meant going from 1 podcast to 4, which, is intense, but we think that's the best way we can serve people right now. So thanks for letting me talk about it too. I appreciate it.
And sometimes I think, it's good for the teacher to get the administrative point of view. So maybe the teachers need to go hit that administrative binge those 20 episodes so they can. Because sometimes as a teacher, we don't know what that administrator has to deal with. Yeah. And same thing with the administrators, because it's been a while since they've been in a classroom. So they don't know what happens necessarily on a day-to-day basis. So you got those options where, like, I'm going to go and hit those binge series for the administrators to see what it is that they have. In those 15 minutes, and micro-learning is kind of a buzzword right now, and those 15 minutes are a great that's your commute to work. Now mine's only like 5 minutes, but still, I mean that's something you can put on in your planning period where you're maybe grading that essay or doing something. You can listen to some things.
We also found that the ongoing podcast, if you come in and you're brand new, I might not be talking about brand new topics, right? So the binge episodes are just there for if you're brand new and you want to get up to speed, here you go. At any time you can jump into those 20 episodes.
Right. So what do you have besides the podcast? And you have a book,
Yep.
PBL Simplified. You wrote a book. I believe you said that earlier.
Yep.
Available on Amazon.
Yep. Anywhere books are sold.
Or
anywhere books are sold, you can find
anywhere
it.
books are sold. Great book. Great book. I've read it. It's got some quality stuff in it. So I recommend you do that. What's coming down the pipe from Magnify Learning? What's coming up? Can you give us a little preview of anything you got that might be new and innovative? I mean, it's always innovating and are always growing over there. But anything exciting coming?
No, your podcast instincts are strong, Dan Thomas. Your podcast is going to be awesome, brother. It's a good tee up. So it's called the PBL Movement Online Community. Call it the PMOC, PBL Movement Online Community. And the commitment is that we will be the most active PBL online community in the world. We've been in online communities. I'm sure you join them, you ask a question, and it's just crickets. You never hear from anybody. And so I actually pay moderators to be in the community to make sure every question gets answered. And we're putting out content. We're putting out boot camps. So there's a private Facebook group. There's a whole set of on-demand courses, and then all of our resources, all wrapped up into this PMOC, the PBL Movement Online Community. And it's really a place for if you're brand new to PBL, if you're a veteran. We've got people from Florida to New York to Kentucky, boys from Malaysia, right? Just like
nice.
Because geographically you might not have your people there, right? So it's like, how do we get together? And we always say like online makes the most sense, but only if we're active, right? So we're committing to being active here. So it is a paid membership. It's $275 for the year. And you can pay it monthly, but so you actually also get an in-person conference and then 2 virtual conferences. Oh,
so that's worth it right there.
That was our thought. We just wanted to over-deliver. So the price of a one-day conference, you get the conference, right? But you also get a year of support, whether it be on-demand work that you want. You want to do it by yourself, that's fine. If you want to jump into the community, you can do that too, right? So we're really trying to just support, again, a movement, right? A movement needs support. It needs to be fed to move. So that's something that's coming up. We've got a couple hundred educators in there right now. But we really think, I told my team, I said, we're doing this for 7 years at least, even if nobody joins. We're going to do this for 7 years. And I think it's going to jump. I think the momentum's going to be there because I think people are ripe for it. They just want, how do I connect with other like-minded educators if I'm not close to them?
And that is key. And I think as educators, we found that, I know I did personally during the pandemic areas and COVID, that, Twitter chats and webinars and online whatever, just chats, just like we're having here.
Yeah.
Like I would never be able to talk to you before, right? You're down in Texas, I'm in New York State. We probably would have never met if it weren't for the virtual world. And I think that your PMOC is going to be huge for some of the listeners to get into, even if they just go lurk for a little while.
Yeah.
And just see what's there. But seeing people that are dealing with the same thing you're dealing with, I think is huge. And the successes that they're getting after the struggle. And I think that, like you said, you're building a movement. It's a movement maker. And I think that, like you said, you wanted to be grassroots. And I think that's a great way to get everybody, to get the force of everybody going in the same direction.
Yeah.
As opposed to you being out in front going, let's go, let's go, let's go. Now we're, you're kind of leading from the middle, so to speak.
There you go. I like that term.
Yeah, that's not one of my own. I probably heard it somewhere. Awesome. Anything else you want to share before, we talked about how we can get a hold of you. So we're going to look at Magnify Learning, and I'll put all kinds of links in the show notes for this, for where you can get some of this stuff. Where you can get your book. Any last minute thoughts, Ryan, before we close out today?
Dan, maybe one last one. I leave Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays open just to meet with people via Zoom, right? And so, as you reach out, I try to be just super accessible. So if you're a classroom teacher or you're a principal or maybe you're a community partner, who knows? Like
Sure.
just reach out. Let's have a 30-minute conversation and just see where it goes. Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can't. It'll only cost you 30 minutes though, right? And so just the last thing, Dan, would be just to thank you. I appreciate your time. You know, the research that went into your questions. Like I didn't say any of that lightly. That you've got some podcast instincts that, I really appreciate. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
I'm glad I can help you. You helped me out a lot, Ryan. I know, with this podcast too, as well. In what you're doing with Magnify Learning, it's my pleasure to have you talk to you on this podcast, and get your voice out, hopefully to my listeners, and get you out there and into another area that might not be there. So again, I want to help you with your movement. I love what you're doing, and I'm gonna keep watching. And even after I retire, I'm still gonna be out there preaching about PBL and play and fun and having fun in the classroom. And I think that's PBL brings a lot of that fun aspect to the classroom.
It's a
So I
big deal. Thanks,
appreciate your
Dan.
time.